Chapter 3. What sorcery is this? Rich was running. Whether he was being chased or if he was chasing, he couldn't tell. He could only see a few feet in front of him, and on the edges of the darkness, strange creatures lurked. Just ahead, he could see Diane and Ian, but they skirted the edges of his vision, and they seemed to be running away from him. He called out, but his voice was muffled and faint. Suddenly, the ground opened up in front of him, swallowing his family into inky darkness below. He collapsed, gasping, and the whole world swirled in to crush him. Rich awoke with a gasp, once again surrounded by cold, but this time lying on something soft, with a thin layer of warm cloth keeping the freeze at bay. He stretched, feeling like his whole body was one giant bruise, and groaned when the blanket slid off of him and to the floor. But the sudden shock woke him up fully, and he opened his eyes to find himself in a strange room, with purple walls and a single bed which he was sitting on. Rich sat up and hung his feet over the edge of the bed. He yawned and lifted his hand to his mouth, or at least he tried to lift his hand. It was wrapped up in the sheets, tangled from a night of tossing and turning. He absent-mindedly began to unwrap his hand from the sheets. He looked out the open doorway and wondered where Soot could have gone. He remembered now the sensation of the Enderman lifting him up and taking him away, and he assumed they brought him here to recover. He just hoped they had remembered his cat. As he pulled another layer of sheets off, he noticed something strange. The cloth seemed to be glowing. The white material shone with a strange purple light that shimmered and swirled. Curious, he yanked the rest of the sheet off of his hand and examined it carefully. But the glow was gone, leaving clean white cloth behind. Confused now, he stood up and held the sheet up to the window to see if maybe there was some sort of light from outside that caused it. He reached out to pull the blinds further open and stopped in shock. It wasn't the sheets that were glowing. It was his hand. From his wrist to his fingertips, his hand was shining. It shone with a violet light that shimmered and wavered. As he watched, the glow slowly died down, and underneath the glow, his hand was black as coal. At first he was afraid that he had somehow burned his hand, charring it to a crisp, but it didn't hurt, and he could flex his fingers just like normal. It looked almost like cooled lava, obsidian, or Enderman skin. He tapped it with his other hand, and it felt a little rougher, but otherwise it felt fine. Experimentally, he tapped the bed, and the mattress gave under the pressure. The sensation of the cloth was dulled a little, so his sense of touch wasn't quite as sensitive, but that was all. He pulled his hand away from it, and the bed flew up towards his face. Panicked, he dropped to the floor and covered his head with his hands, preparing for the room to collapse inward. Mind racing, he tried to find an answer for why this was happening, but the only reason he could find was that the mutant must still be alive. Maybe there was a gap in the obsidian, or maybe it was tougher than even that hardened stone, and now it had tracked him down to seek out its revenge. But when the roof didn't come down to grind him to a paste, he slowly raised his head. Above him, the bed remained suspended on nothingness, but it didn't move. Cautiously, he moved his arms away from his face, and as if reacting to the movement, the bed swung around over him. He froze, and the bed stopped too. It made him think he was being stalked by a big cat, except instead of claws and teeth, it had springs and a footboard. Watching it carefully, he slowly moved one foot and braced it against the wall. Then he did the same with the other. Still wary of the bed above, he put his normal hand flat on the floor, ready to push away with his feet and start running, hopefully faster than it could catch him. And then he started to put his other blackened hand in the same position, and the bed shifted. He stopped and watched it carefully. Once again, he slid his normal hand along the floor, and nothing happened. But when he moved his other hand, the bed moved with it. Disbelieving, he slowly stood and waved his blackened hand, goggling as the bed moved in sync. Somehow he was controlling the bed. Just like the mutant had shifted walls and pillars, he could make the bed move from a distance just by moving his arm. Excited now, he carefully put the bed down on the floor and concentrated. And just like that, he felt the connection break, and the bed stopped moving. He felt alive. Not only had he survived 2 catastrophes with barely a moment's break between them, he had gained this awesome power. Imagine what he could build with this. He had visions of himself moving whole walls and roofs, able to put together a house in minutes. He could see himself creating statues and fountains, walls and archways. He couldn't wait to show Diane. And then his visions all shattered. How could he enjoy himself while he didn't even know what had happened to his family? Broken-hearted, he looked out the window. He could see only a dark sky, filled with static, and the edge of a white stone cliff that jutted off into nothingness. It matched his mood perfectly. He walked out the door, limping forward to the cliff. He reached the edge and peered out into the darkness. He thought of the disaster, the explosions and destruction. Tears filled his vision, blurring the static. Angrily, he reached behind him with his newfound power and grabbed the first thing he came in contact with. With a shout of rage and desolation, he hurled it out away from him. He watched as a chunk of bleached stone, bigger than him, flew into the emptiness beyond the cliff. As it disappeared into the distance, Rich crumbled from his pain. He knelt on the ground, head in his hands, feeling the rough new skin on his right hand dig into his face. He would give up this new power easily if he could have just protected his town. After what seemed like an eternity, something touched his shoulder gently. A voice whispered into his mind.
What has damaged you?
He turned to see an Enderman bending over him. It was not as tall as the others, and it hunched over slightly, making it almost as short as a normal player. The hand on his shoulder trembled just a little, but it regarded Rich with bright lavender eyes. He gazed up at the clearly elderly Enderman and took a deep, shaky breath.
Damaged me?
He mumbled.
Mutant sure did a number on me with the smashing and crushing and all.
That was not the answer I sought.
The Enderman tilted its head, almost like a dog, reminding Rich how different their ways of thinking and communication were.
You have pain brought upon you from before the battle.
Shocked, Rich felt his jaw drop. How could the Enderman have known? As he scrambled to find the words, the Enderman stood up a little straighter.
Do not be shocked or afraid. We can sense your thoughts. How else could we communicate? But we do not delve deep into your mind.
The Enderman patted Rich's shoulder a little clumsily, as if not used to the action.
Tell of your troubles, and I will listen.
Rich sat for a moment, thinking. He raised his hands in front of his face and looked at the difference between them.
First tell me why I have this.
He did want to tell someone of his troubles, but even more so, he wanted to understand what was going on and what he could do about it. He could act from there.
That is a story of length.
The Enderman eased itself down to sit next to Rich and hung its long legs over the edge of the cliff.
But you will understand.
With one long arm, it reached over and lightly touched the center of Rich's forehead. The world around him dissolved, and he fell into the story.